I'm Keith Olbermann, and this is The Resistance. What Trump's new best friend Vladimir Putin did to this country by computer. What Putin intends to do again with or without Trump's help. What that Kremlin-connected lawyer reportedly had in mind on June 9th, 2016, that Trump Jr. and Kushner and Manafort were apparently all too happy to hear about. This whole cyber nightmare has now been compared publicly to a terrorist attack by ISIS. And amazingly, that is altogether correct and appropriate. Yet it may still be insufficient. 50 years ago this month, I saw a work of fiction in which war had become so sophisticated that it could be entirely simulated by computer. No bombs, no destruction, no huge budgets. A supercomputer would simply calculate how many on each side would die in a given nuclear attack, and that number of citizens on each side would matter-of-factly report to their own government to be killed. This was 1967, and I was 8 years old, and real nuclear war was a constant, daily, inescapable threat in American life. Yet this work of fiction somehow terrified me even more than the reality did. It was something beyond evil yet utterly plausible about the detachment, the mass murder by proxy, the ability for one civilization to destroy another by computer. The work of fiction was called A Taste of Armageddon, and it was a Robert Hamner short story transformed into, of all things, the 23rd episode of the original series Star Trek. It has stayed with me for half a century, and nothing I have experienced since had quite captured that same mixture of terror and detachment. And then I read an op-ed piece in the Washington Post. And the true evil of the Russian cyber war against our electoral process last year, and the potential cyber war for next year, and Donald Trump's criminal indifference to both came into full perspective for me. We are not yet reporting to the disintegration booths of A Taste of Armageddon because the Kremlin's cyber warfare desk has told us to, but we are sending our freedoms in to be destroyed. The piece was written by an associate dean at the Yale Law School named Asha Rangappa, who teaches courses in national security law at Yale and other institutions, and who from 2002 to 2005, as the Washington Post article notes, was an FBI special agent specializing in counterintelligence. I was an FBI agent. Trump's lack of concern about Russian hacking shocks me. I'd like to do something I don't usually do here. I'd like to read much of Ms. Rangappa's conclusion. It is as terrifying and already as seared into my memory as that science fiction about bloodless computerized war from 50 years ago. She writes, "The Russia case is different because its operation last year did not simply try to use the American system as a vehicle for Russia's benefit. Instead, Russia essentially attempted to break the system itself by hacking political parties' computer and email systems, flooding the media with disinformation, and purposely sowing political chaos in the voting process, which is the bedrock of our democracy. Although its activities didn't involve bombs or dead bodies, Russia's efforts were no less dangerous than any terrorist attack. In fact, the insidiousness of Russia's interference lies in its invisibility. The American public did not even know that their freedom of choice was potentially being manipulated and distorted for foreign interests. For any president to ignore the situation is shocking. My former colleagues at the FBI, who are working on this case and have uncovered the full scale of Russia's efforts, must be incredulous at Trump's cavalier attitude." What Ms. Rangappa wrote next is both clarifying and terrifying. To understand their perspective, consider this happening in the context we normally think of as a national security threat. Imagine that during the 2016 presidential election, a candidate publicly invited the Islamic State to bomb the Democratic Party headquarters. And then imagine that such a bombing in fact took place, resulting in the worst terrorist attack in U.S. history. Now further imagine that the new president not only had no interest in learning more about who caused the attack or bringing them to justice, but in fact went out of his way to make nice with the Islamic State and offer them political and diplomatic concessions. Finally, imagine that there may be evidence that members of the president's campaign or other American citizens were actively or passively involved in facilitating such an attack. She concludes, "The fact pattern of the Russia investigation so far is similar, and that's an investigation Comey says Trump had no interest in following closely. Regardless of which storyline you believe about Comey's testimony, it is, in the end, a sideshow. The real issue is Russia's assault on our democracy and how we respond to it. If the president intends to stay true to his oath, both he and all Americans, regardless of political affiliation, will support the FBI in getting to the bottom of the Russian threat and making sure that it never happens again, unquote. Asha Rangappa, writing in the Washington Post more than 1 month ago, June 10th. It escaped my attention for nearly a month. It should not escape yours. And it will stay with me, just as that television episode of computerized bloodless war has stayed with me since childhood. It is what happened to our country last year. It explains what happened to our country last year. It warns what will happen again to our country next year and in 2020. And it underscores that Donald Trump is doing nothing to stop this. And worse yet, he is enabling it, floating and then backing away from some joint form of cybersecurity with the nation that everyone but he and his apologists recognize attacked us. A taste of Armageddon, except we give one country control of all the computers. To survive as a nation, we must stop it and stop him. Resist. Remove. Peace.